Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. So, Comcast investors who own NBC Universal received some positive news recently. Are you ready to hear it? Peacock, their flagship streaming service, has lost $639 million in 2024 so far. Yeah, that was the good news. And to be fair, it is quite a bit better than the $825 million they lost in the last quarter of 2023. Forcing NFL fans to watch a wildcard playoff game on the service alongside a well-received new TED show, Twisted Metal, and the home video release of Oppenheimer did seem to drive subscribers. 34 million now, up from 31 million at the end of last year. So there is, honestly, some positive spin to put on all this, and Comcast was very happy to provide that. It's only when you zoom out a bit that you see how dire things have been for NBC, Peacock, and, on the largest scale, the biggest players in Hollywood for the past few years. It genuinely feels like we're in a tough transition period, and I want to talk about just how shaky the industry appears to be right now. I know I led with numbers, but believe me, the business winners and losers here isn't really what I'm interested in. I love television, and as we watch networks like NBC slowly get put to rest in this transition to streaming, I worry that opportunities to create great new shows are shrinking as the industry contracts in this post-2020 world. So let's talk about TV and streamers, where they're at, and why Peacock should be really, really worried.
The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC.
So I'm going to get back to the big streamers, but first I think it's important to discuss something that most people, especially young people, probably don't think much about anymore. American broadcast television. You know, NBC, CBS, ABC, the shambling corpse of the CW. These days, they're mostly held together by cheap daytime programming and, most importantly of all, sports. On the scripted front, there's still the big sturdy big name franchises like NCIS and CSI, and NBC's Law & Order. NBC was actually the most watched broadcast network last year, something that would have shocked me 5 to 10 years ago when CBS seemed impossible to knock off that perch. But the fact is, that title means a hell of a lot less than it used to, as 2023 marked, according to the Nielsen people, the first time that broadcast and cable made up less than half of TV usage. Basic cable channels like MTV and Nickelodeon have responded to this by almost becoming a zombified version of themselves, airing endless repeats of the same couple of shows. NBC is not at that point, but the retreat to streaming is pretty obvious. For one thing, they just announced that the 5th season of Law & Order Organized Crime, one of the network's most high-profile shows and the more serialized spin-off of Law & Order SVU, will now air exclusively on Peacock. So NBC, one of the first TV channels, broadcasting for 85 years on television, looks like it's on its last legs. And what's there to replace it? To continue the legacy of the home of Seinfeld, Star Trek, 30 Rock, Hill Street Blues, and so many more. A streaming service that lags really far behind most of its competitors. Like, forget Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime. Those at least had a massive head start. Peacock also reportedly has about half the subscribers of Paramount Plus, which has CBS under its umbrella. And people don't exactly consider Paramount Plus to be a huge success either. The fact is, both CBS and NBC, but especially NBC, are facing an industry-wide change where it's looking like they're going to go from near the top of the heap to the bottom. They were very happy to license hits like The Office out to Netflix in the late 2000s and early 2010s, only trying to put the cat back in the bag near the end of the decade. Like other legacy media companies, they tried to follow the Netflix model of getting deep into debt, creating a ton of shows and movies, many far more expensive than NBC's programming ever was, and hoping to balloon up fast enough to get through those rough years. This seemed pretty attractive when every exciting 2010s tech startup was doing it and the interest rates for borrowing money was really low. But it looks a lot less so these days when the economy is in a different place and shareholders are demanding that sweet short-term profit. Netflix seemed to turn that corner just in time. The major streamers that followed in their wake, Yeah, a little less so. And even though Comcast is massive, they're also not quite as well positioned in a battle with Amazon or Apple when it comes to a lose money the longest and keep going competition. And that's a big issue, as according to Bloomberg, net income at the largest US entertainment companies has dropped by more than 60% since 2013. So how do they pull out of this tailspin? I mean, I don't know, that's way above my pay grade. I'm just some guy who makes videos. Probably by just getting bought up by some bigger fish like everything else seems to eventually. But I do have some thoughts on why Peacock is struggling to get their shows on people's radar, and where they may have a surprising strength. Because here's the thing, despite how negative this video has been, I kinda like Peacock. I like their catalog of old shows and movies, and I've been a big fan of some of their originals, most notably Twisted Metal and Poker Face, both of which I do think would have been major breakout shows had they been on Netflix and not Peacock, which, is an issue. General audiences may be pretty set in their ways when it comes to the big streamers, but what they're streaming is pretty interesting, especially if you're NBC. The number one most streamed show in 2023 was not a big, expensive streamer miniseries. It was the 2010 show Suits, a light legal drama that aired on NBC's sister cable channel, the USA Network, 10 or so years ago. And you'll find plenty of other network or basic cable shows on there. NCIS, Gilmore Girls, Friends, Supernatural, I could go on. Even though this isn't all people want to watch, people do seem to still like television as it existed for decades before Netflix's ultra-serialized, extremely pricey, one long movie as a season house style became the norm. And yes, when it comes to the numbers, these shows have a massive advantage over nearly all recent ones, with their robust long seasons going up against these completely anemic 6 to 8 episode seasons that we get today. But that kind of makes you wonder, why not keep making seasons like that? Well, budgets really skyrocketed in the last 10 years, with the assumption that that's just what audiences expect now. Rings of Power, Halo, all the Marvel stuff, they're all extremely expensive. Like, did you know that there was an Amazon Prime show called Citadel that cost $50 million per episode? To put that in context, a final season episode of Game of Thrones cost about 15. My point isn't that there's no place for big budget spectacle on TV, but that maybe that's not where streamers with network TV roots should be planting their flag. And I know what you might be thinking, don't they still make network TV shows and almost none of them are worth watching? And you'd have a point. I do think there's some stuff airing on network TV right now, like the recent Columbo-like Elsbeth or the sitcom Ghosts, that are fun and worth watching. But for the most part, yeah, network TV is feeling very generic, stale, and safe. And while, yes, generally those are things you can put at the feet of any era of network television, I think in the past, you at least always had some really talented showrunners and writers that would push up against that effectively, using the tried and true network TV story engines and genres like cop shows, workplace sitcoms, or hospital shows, and injecting a lot of real personality into them, creating these sprawling worlds of characters and relationships. It's what separates your Lost, Community, and ER from your usual generic network fare. But the fact is, network TV doesn't land the top showrunner talent anymore. Your giant mega producer deals are being struck with streamers these days, rarely with NBC. There's a lot of baggage and creative constraints that come with network TV, and at this point, it's perceived as incredibly uncool and on its way out. And I get that, but I think it's worth pointing out that Netflix, with their obsession with data-driven creative choices and a need for shows to be ultra-bingeable, comes with creative constraints of its own. I'm not sure there's a place for Peacock in the future, but I do know what I'd at least like to see them try. Basically, embracing what network TV can do well at its best. Those longer seasons, often more episodic in nature, a story engine that can provide new episodes without making everything feel like a dragged out movie, and characters that feel like old friends you want to invite into your home each and every week, while also dropping some of network TV's worst aspects. The dated censorship, the reliance on the same few big franchises, and its weird, overlit, overly made up look. I know cinematography hasn't always been network TV's strong suit, but it's really jarring to compare an episode of an older show like NYPD Blue with the chintzy, incredibly sterile look of most network TV today. there's still an audience for an older style of TV out there. We can see that in the streaming data. And I know I tend to pick on streaming shows a lot, but there's perfectly good reason why a lot of young people reject modern network television that's very valid as well. I really like ER, but I have a hard time sitting through an episode of a more recent network show in that vein, like Chicago Med. I think Peacock could do something interesting by combining what works with older, often comfort food TV with the strengths of the best of streaming TV to create shows that feel more like a hybrid of both. I think Ted, Poker Face, and surprisingly Twisted Metal are a small step in that kind of direction, and I hope Peacock really starts to explore it. Because really, Peacock spent a lot of its earliest years trying to be Netflix, when I think what a lot of people would like to see from them is TV that feels like the best of NBC, but not aimed at your parents or grandparents like most NBC is today. And as someone who loves many of those older shows, I think that's a pretty worthy goal. Alright, forget the transition. This week, I want to thank Brilliant for being such a long-time supporter of the channel, with a mission I really believe in. It's a service I'd recommend to anyone looking to pick up new skills and keep their mind sharp. For years now, Brilliant has been making the process of learning way more fun and accessible than ever before. So yeah, Brilliant helps you tackle math, science, and computer science concepts in a highly interactive way, but it also allows you to do it entirely on your schedule. Classes that fit perfectly into your life. And there's thousands of lessons here, with new ones being added constantly. Spending just 30 minutes a day or so on them is both fun and really builds our skills, without any of the stress that you might remember associating with these topics. A really worthwhile addition is the data analysis focused classes, like Introduction to Probability, which uses probability to represent and interpret data and events effectively. So to try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/midnight or click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. That's brilliant.org/midnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.